The only way that you can prove that a river over a long period has degraded is by setting an initial baseline. That data is vital, and then you can say categorically the river's getting broken without guessing about it. That is the power of our data that we collect on these rivers.
Freshwater systems are one of the least protected ecosystems in the world. We are trying to gather arguments to protect them.
As we go down these rivers, we try to really understand them and see what's there.
We don't have baselines for river systems really anywhere in the world. What we are doing is, for the first time, we're establishing early 21st century river baselines, ecological and hydrological, so that in 2030, in 2050, in 2100, we know exactly what the river system looked like, how it functioned right now in the early 2020s. The main thing we're doing is permanent sampling sites that can be repeated in the future. That's when we stop every 10 kilometers. We'll send up the drone to take photographs in all directions.
We measured the water quality using the acute.
This gives us 20 different parameters of useful information on determining the quality of the water. This includes pH and oxygen saturation.
Wow, source of the Congo River. We made it. Incredible.
A very high pH of 8.4 over here. That means it's very alkaline water. That's supposed to be 7, and usually the sources are a bit more acidic.
Water quality at sources, we really want the best water quality possible.
We do eDNA samples where we take environmental DNA from the river.
And that gives us an indication of the biodiversity that lives within the river itself.
Breaks down the DNA. This is extraction, start of the extraction process.
Thank you. Each night we'll set nets to catch fish. This is to sample DNA, to look for new species.
See, this is something different. Look how different he is. Big eyes, so that's not even on here. I've never seen this thing before.
Wow, hey? My word. It's got flattest noses.
Yeah. So now I'm going to cut them open and find the liver, and we take the liver for DNA sample so they can sequence it back in the lab and confirm if it's that species, might be a new species.
What we're trying to see is if we catch this invasive crayfish. This is the trap we actually want every morning to be empty, nothing to be in here. Like, if we get a crayfish in here, that's very concerning. They're very destructive and invasive when they get into a river system. They destroy everything.
We do a lot of surveying throughout the day, where we basically count all the birds, all the wild animals, all the domestic animals, all the people that we see along the river. We note the buildings and the villages along the riverbanks.
The people living around these sources have been in the business of clean air and clean water for millennia. The respect that these people have for these river systems, for the peatlands and for the forests, is something I haven't encountered elsewhere.
We also do something called a ZIS assessment. ZIS stands for the Zambian Invertebrate Scoring System.
A healthy system will have both your very sensitive species and your lowest scoring species.
Which essentially we're just looking at the macroinvertebrates, the bugs in the water, and they can give an indication of water quality and river health as well. We sample different habitat types. We sample marginal vegetation and submerged aquatic vegetation. We also sample gravel and sand and mud. And we then take those stored samples and they'll go to the lab and be refrigerated and stored for future use.
We also measure water flow, which is quite important in terms of knowing which area contributes the most to the larger main stem of the river.
We use an ADCP, acoustic Doppler current profiler, to sort of determine the discharge of the river. We pull that device across the river close to the source, and then we sort of get the discharge right on top.
We would typically stop at every tributary and we'd measure the water flow coming in from that tributary into the main stem.
So we have 88 cubic meters of water flowing past here. Where we started, we had 8 cubes. Right at the source, it was 0 cubes.
We would also measure the main stem every 50 to 70 kilometers to see how that water supply increases or decreases.
And when we end the expedition on our last day, we also pull it across so we know exactly how much water comes down the river right at the end of our expedition.
Within 3 to 6 months, we will have reports prepared. We will start with publications as to the river basin itself, the identification of a new source or a primary source according to our measurements. We will then be starting to motivate biodiversity surveys in specific areas that we see are particularly interesting and undersurveyed, or areas that we found interesting species, indication of finding other interesting species.
There's a team, an ever-growing team, of biodiversity scientists and GIS specialists.
We see firsthand not only how the river is faring, but how people and biodiversity are interacting with it. And in understanding these interactions, we are able to provide an in-depth snapshot of river health that will be invaluable to anyone helping protect it, whether it's today or well into the future.